your first impression? I mean, this reporter is really well known for his seriousness, but this time he became really controversial, and people are asking his credibility.
What did he write? What did he say?
It's about Pottinger's remarks at a recent meeting with experts, saying that the bloody nose strategy might help the midterm election for Trump. And the White House just denied it.
Who are these experts?
We don't know. That's all I have. I'm David.
Not me.
It might. It might help. If it goes well.
No. Might get Trump impeached.
So just give you a quick overview of what we have been doing. The Korean report, the copy of the Korean report I put on the table is the latest edition of USK Washington Review. So as you may know well, it is in Korean, targeting South Korean foreign policy elites, including people at the Blue House, Foreign Ministry, Defense Ministry, Education Ministry, and all the usual suspects, and the think tanks and universities. So far, with the format we have been doing is getting contributions from the experts. We all made the contributions. And this time, what I'm trying to do is have a brown bag lunch and just have the experts get together and discuss what would Trump's North Korea policy this year would look like. So I thought one way to do that is just come up with a couple of keywords and discuss.
Well, I have a little bit of a problem with that approach. No, I'll tell you what it is. The situation is developing, and we're going to have the Olympics in a few days. And we're going to have Kim Jong-un's sister coming down. We're going to have probably Ivanka Trump going to the closing ceremony. We've got Pence, who doesn't seem to know how he wants to play it.
Right.
Originally, he was going to stick it to the North Koreans, but then I guess he had a conversation with Trump, and his more recent remarks have been toned down quite a bit. So what I'm saying is it's an evolving situation. So what happens at the Olympics and in the immediate aftermath is going to be pretty key. So that's why dividing it up like this, although it has, I suppose, its advantages, could be a little bit misleading for the readers. I think it's pretty clear that Trump and President Moon have been in frequent telephone contact. I don't know how many conversations they've had out there. Anyone know offhand? But it must be at least a half dozen. And it seems like they're getting to know each other. And the other thing is the Japanese policy that might be moving a little bit. I mean, Abe did say finally that he was going to go. And so the situation could be in flux if we have a nice Olympics.
So the timing is a little bit challenging, the timing of the discussion. we're going to publish the report this coming Sunday. So by the time we will know whether Pence met with Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un, any big developments, and the readers might feel a little bit weird about what we discussed today. So again, as I said, we're trying to look at the whole year. So what will be the big variables? And no matter what happens between the two Koreas or Pence and Kim Jong-nam, what are the key variables or key factors that we have to look at in predicting the 2018? That will be a better approach. But as you said, it's an evolving situation. So.
Do you think a meeting would happen? I can't imagine a Pence meeting happening.
Well, he's backtracked a little bit. He asked apparently not to be seated anywhere near the North Korea. But
What do you mean he's backtracked?
well, that's what the original asked for. He was kind of liking this guy's policy, according to the Korean newspaper.
But also that he said that he was going to, announce the strongest, most aggressive sanctions
Right.
while he's there.
And that's going to go over great.
Yeah.
Well, I think another factor that is developing quickly is a possible trade war with China, which is going to throw the whole Asia thing. I mean, that's going to, A, distract from Korea, B, it's going to undermine Trump's whole thing of China's going to help me with North Korea, because this morning the Chinese filed with the WTO, right? Following both South Korea and Taiwan have filed with the WTO about the washing machines. I don't know what the Taiwanese were, but they both filed. And I think, A, Trump is not going to get his wall, or I don't know what's going to happen, but the government shut down the wall. But his other promise to his base was China, 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 jobs, jobs, jobs. So he might be listening to people. Peter Navarro is still in the White House, even though Bannon's not there as his trade person. And if they start a trade war, that's going to totally distract from Korea, but it's going to impact South Korea quite a bit, and Taiwan and Japan, because their supply chains and their investments, foreign direct investments, they're going to be collateral damage if there's a trade war. So I think we should watch that too. That story is developing, and the Chinese they've come out very strongly. They're like, bring it on. You want a trade war? We're ready for a trade war. So that could be the big story 6 months from now rather than North Korea.
The other question for me, the other big variable for me is how much longer is North Korea not...
We're not starting it just.
Oh.
Oh, it's on.
Is it?
It's been on since like 5 minutes ago.
The other big variable is how, when North Korea will test another
Right.
missile next. So how long is this
Sure.
restraint or whatever that they're doing, this outreach going to last? So the longer they not test, it's going to make it more difficult, I would think, for the Trump administration and these ongoing discussions about military strikes to have any weight. And it will, it'll fuel, I think, optimism about North Korea wanting to talk and support the engagement, supporters.
Well, and then is the question of the exercises. And if the U.S. moves immediately to lay on gargantuan joint exercises with Seoul in the atmosphere of good feeling following the Olympics, poisons the atmosphere.
Well, my son said, I mean, my main source on that is my son is in the U.S. Army Reserves in Texas at Dell Computer. He's supposed to go for his 1 month, he does 1 month, 4 weeks a year. He was
Yeah.
supposed to go to Korea in February. And then he contacted me at Christmas, said, Dad, I'm not going in February because, the Olympics, right? And now he says, oh, I think I'm going in April or May. So that indicates to me the exercises. I'll know when my son tells me he's going to Korea. That means the exercises are coming, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna happen.
I think another, a point about this is I don't think, and I'm not faulting Seoul because very few people understand this about Trump. I'm reading Fire and Fury, the book, he is so volatile and changeable and not very strategic thinking that he turns things on a dime. Like everyone got so concerned about his State of the Union address, and I was like, that's nothing compared to George W. Bush. Remember Axis of Evil in his State of the Union address? Was that 2002, I think? And he ended up with Chris Hill doing the six-party talks, even taking North Korea off the terrorism list. What I didn't understand, too, is last week, we know from other issues, I work, on China issues in Taiwan. I mean, there's no way. Trump will definitely be the first American president who never meets the Dalai Lama, despite this, what a big deal that is for Congress that gave him a gold medal. Trump could care less about human rights. He doesn't care. I mean, Ivanka did go to him when the kids got gassed in Syria, so he did that thing, but that was apparently her talking to him. So where did this suddenly come from where Trump not only had well, I guess maybe having Otto Warmberger's parents maybe was the senator from Ohio. Now I'm forgetting his name. The former commerce guy is very good friends with Otto's parents. What's the Republican senator from Ohio? Portman. Rob Portman. Went to the funeral. I guess maybe that got it. But then having the North Korean refugee with the crutches and then having North Korean refugees visit the White House, this was understandable for George W. Bush. He was a born-again Christian. The Midland, Texas ministers. I mean, there was some biographical and ideological basis why George W. Bush cared about persecution of Christians in North Korea. That was understandable. Trump
And he
could,
still cares, right?
Right.
Because he's still working on human rights issues.
but Trump
after-
could care less about this.
But I saw
so
that-
where did that come from
I
last
see
week?
the human rights thing as a prop.
Just a prop.
It's as a prop.
It's like another prop in his circus.
Right. In the way that you bring the defector and Otto Warmbier's parents to show what a terrible regime this is. Not so much that we're going to fight for human rights, but that this is reminding us why North Korea is
bullying
so
almost.
awful.
More Trump bullying
And
maybe.
Pence is supposed to go visit the Cheonan and the
Right. The ruins.
again to remind everybody what North Korea is capable of doing. So I don't see this as a deep interest in human
Right,
rights. We
no.
don't have a special envoy for human rights anymore.
Right.
So it's not about human rights.
Right.
It's about
Pressure.
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 Yeah, I see it as part of maximum pressure, and using the defectors as a
Props. Yeah.
Do you think this is going to be just a one-time pressure word for the State of the Union address, or we will keep using this, utilizing this in North Korea?
Well,
They
Pence-
use it at the National Assembly, so I think it's going to be a recurring thing.
Pence might care more about this because of his born again. Well, he's tied with the born again community. There might be more real concern. I don't see Trump caring about this at all because when he meets with the Chinese, he never brings up human rights at all. They have major issues, as you know. And the Turks.
I think
I
I'm
mean-
missing the point
Yeah.
on this. It's not so much whether the leaders have an interest in human rights and they will push this or not. Even George Bush W. Bush and Laura. It was really about opportunities in which the president, using the presidency to say something, and then creating an opening for the NGO community and others to use that opportunity to open space, open and expanding that space. And so while Trump is, and I wholeheartedly agree that this is all, adding maximum pressure, etc. What it does is it creates opportunities for people who are working on this issue to latch on and to create their own momentum. I would be surprised, if this just kind of ended tomorrow with Trump. I think I'm somewhat on the periphery in all this, but there are people who are working on this who see the political utility, and also you have individuals who are really pushing, and we're not sure that, it's still 1 year old administration. There's still a vast number of positions that need to be filled, and slowly it's being filled. And I would be, there is a new guy in town, well, old guy in town, and whether he's going to use his office for this particular issue, and that's Sam Brownback. Brownback is back in town.
I thought he's going to Rome to do the food thing.
Yeah. No, I think his
And
international-
his tail are between his legs, because
I
as
think
governor of
it's-
Kansas, he was a disaster with that tax policy. I'm
Kansas
Kansas,
politics doesn't matter how bad you are. It's in your DNA. For the vast majority of Kansans, you're Brownback. They're not going to remember this fiasco. They just they don't call the big red one for nothing. And so isn't Brownback the International Religious Freedom Ambassador? Or was he the food guy?
I don't think so. I thought he was supposed to go to the FAO in Rome.
I think it's the International Religious Freedom Ambassador, and hence had to come in. I think that was originally what he wanted.
What, FAO?
And
He's
and-
not doing that?
And I think it's International Religious Freedom Ambassador. Because that's what he likes to do. Sam likes to go visit prisons in Vietnam and China. And that's what he does. That's what he likes.
Sam Brownback to be ambassador at large for international religious freedom.
So he's back.
Oh.
And my guess is, he'll play a role because this is his baby. The Human Rights Act. He still has a lot of individuals working on this, and so I wouldn't be surprised if this creates a momentum of its own. And all it takes is really one individual in any administration to take charge and then have enough whispering capacity and power to the president.
How long is Kim Jong-un going to stay at the Olympics? Is she staying the whole time?
Kim Yo-jong.
The reason I could see, just reading this book about Jarvanka, as they're called by, Jared got himself involved in the whole Middle East thing. They think they're major diplomats. I would think if Kim Jong-un's sister were around to the closing of the Olympics, I could see Ivanka going over and talking to her and just saying, if Jared can solve the Middle East, I can solve Korea. That's why I'm wondering how long
I think they're going to meet.
you think Ivanka and her, if she stays that long. I don't think it'll necessarily be Pence. I think it'll be Ivanka. And this is part of their self-image of the couple, that they can tell the old man and they can solve problems for him. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ivanka and Kim's sister meet at the closing of the Olympics. That's what my guess would be.
I think it's very likely.
before we move on, I mean, I would like to have some more discussion on the bloody nose strategy, but before we move on, let me ask this question about human rights issue. So, I mean, this issue has been very political, and it has drawn a lot of political attention in Washington. But in what way human rights, the North Korean human rights, would put more pressure on North Korea if, and when Trump really wants to utilize this issue? I mean, we already have very strong voices and criticizing North Korea. A lot of law, sanctions against North Korea based on this human rights issue. But what more can Trump do based on this human rights?
Well, the trouble with playing the human rights issue is it's very easy for North Korea to showboat on this. They could, for example, invite evangelical groups to come to North Korea. And we're already seeing problems developing in Los Angeles. Some of the aid packages that, say, Heidi Linton has put together. You can't send them through China because they have nail clippers in them, and the nail clipper could be used as a weapon. Also, North Korea could invite religious people who are interested in human rights to come in and take a look. It's the easiest thing in the world for them to do.
They haven't.
They haven't yet, but that may be
Well,
lying in wait.
and when I used to do these 145 tracks with the North Koreans, in fact, I actually told them, stop inviting Bill Richardson. Doesn't help you guys. Doesn't help your case in Washington. Invite down that. And what I told them was, look, your people are not gonna hear what he has to say. He's gonna denounce you guys, none of your people are gonna see this or hear this. So let him have his say. And then he'll come back, and what you wanna do is to have people like him say, well, we've got to work within the system, or work with, and that's your end game. Stop bringing people who will just reflect your views.
Yeah, exactly.
And they thought it was sufficiently interesting. They also said, that's moving anything in North Korea along their one straw line of communication out of New York is nearly impossible.
Let me move on. Have you a little bit more discuss the bloody nose strategy. So my question is it safe to say that the White House is more and more inclined to consider the bloody nose strategy
I don't think so.
and won't drop the card no matter what developments we will see between the two Koreas?
I don't think so. They need an excuse to launch the punch to the nose. If they do it out of the blue, it's illegal under international law, and they're gonna catch hell. And they need a pretext. If the North Koreans don't give them one, they're not going to be able to do it. And again, I'll go back to what I said before. And if there's an atmosphere of good feeling after the Olympics, that gives North Korea a grace period. Unless they launch some provocation, a missile or another nuclear test, it's going to be hard for Trump to do it.
I agree, but I think what's going to, I think there's a timeline here. I think the North Koreans are going to ask for the South Koreans. They're going to cash in their chips. And they're going to make all kinds of demands, and will the South Koreans go along with it? I think they will go along with very many of them, including almost no military exercises. I really don't see this government continuing military exercise this year.
Why?
Hmm?
Why?
Because the inner core of this administration's policymakers are hell-bent on making a change. I don't think Americans really appreciate some of the things that Koreans come to Washington to say. They're not picking up. At every speech, they make the notion that this is a president or out of candlelight revolution. But what the hell does that mean? To those guys, that means something different than what we think of. Oh, there are like masses of people with candlelights and this emotion. What they're saying is they have a national mandate to change. They have a national mandate to change, and they're going to do this. And they have a finite 5-year program, and they're hell-bent on doing it.
The public's not with them on that.
Well, 60-70% of that, to
Want to
these
stop
guys,
exercises?
it's not about exercises to me.
No, he's talking about-
It's about his mandate as president and his presidency to do things, and those guys will interpret the public poll support as a mandate, and so that's why they keep reinforcing this notion that every panel discussion by the guys that they send is, and so it has two implications. One is give us a break. And so those Americans who are critical of Moon administration, it's a way of saying, look, this is a guy who went against the wishes of the people. So he was elected on candlelight revolution, and yet he's going along with the U.S., whether it was that THAAD deployment and the sanctions, and so give him a break. So that's message number one. And message number two is that that he has that he can revert to that base of massive public support that brought him into power, and so I really think the second and so this this is a government intoxicated with power. I'm not talking about Moon per se, but his inner circle, and so
What's so unusual about that?
because I was actually having a very academic discussion of Asian power. Power in Asia is not to be accumulated, it's to be used. It's amorphous, it's shapeless. You write it when you have an opportunity because you don't know when you're going to lose it. And so these guys have a timetable. And the people we normally think we talk to are your barbarian handlers. They're not the ones who make Blue House decisions. And these guys are hell-bent on making changes. And so I think on a slew of issues, from they're drunk on power, drunk on inter-Korean relations after Olympics, North Koreans are going to make some great demands. And I think they will go along with very many of those.
So you think they're going to veer left after the Olympics
And the midterm elections.
in June?
I think there's going to be an onslaught of changes in personnel. I mean, if you look at the people who left the embassy here, they've all been they're like out in the pasture. They're in Siberia. All of the pro-U.S. guys in the foreign ministry are gone. They're, the guy who is my friend who was unfortunately brought in as chief of staff to Yoon Byung-se is at the is at Kinu, I think, or unification or something. And he showed up, and they said, "Why are you here?" And they said, "This is my new, my new position." Oh, you don't have to come out. And so, and another friend who went to Green Growth Institute. So a lot of these pro-America guys who worked in the North America division are now just, they're on the Siberia. So they're getting their guys into Washington. And that's true for all positions. And my guess is it's going to just get worse. And so I think military exercises are done.
I hope so.
I think it's done because everyone says, no, it's all in motion. And I'm like, I've been pretty good at getting things right. I mean, I got it right on Victor not getting things right.
I think though they might be misreading the American people's view, because I mean, when I go out like to Chicago or St. Louis, to see family or friends, which is not the Beltway, your average American's 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't even know anything about North Korea or have any impression. But you've had things like Otto Warmberger getting killed. That resonates with parents who have college kids. You had the recent thing in Hawaii where the guy miscalculated and you had people running for air raid shelters that they haven't done since the Cold War.
I know, my friend
And
put
I
up a
think,
Facebook video of her crying in the car.
but I mean, I think North Korea as an issue has now filtered down to Joe and Jane's six-pack. They're kind of aware, and Seoul has to be careful that they don't look like they're kind of not being good allies in this. And now you have UN sanctions. I mean,
If what you
If
say
we're-
is true, then we're in big trouble because this is an administration that is not into alliances. So if
Right.
South
Well, that's
Korea is
another
not
point.
is not invested in the alliance, and this administration is already inclined to dismiss alliances, then we're in big trouble.
That's why this op-ed I
True.
was going to write is Rocket Man and the Problem Man and the Demise of the U.S. RK Alliance. The Problem Man.
문제. Let me
I've
move-
been warned not to write that.
Unless you have something more to talk about bloody nose strategy.
Well, I think it's seen its day. It's an illegal strategy unless there's a provocation.
The bloody nose, the steam has been let out as a
Yeah,
result of
that's
the
a good way to
Olympics.
put it. I would agree.
and also Trump is quite often bluster. He's a bully. I mean, he says all sorts of stuff. Like when he says, we're not going to tolerate this from North Korea or that. I think people have started to figure out he's more bluff than actual.
The problem is that if North Korea thinks that it's bluff and it does a missile test, and it's not a bluff, then we're in trouble too.
Then
True.
then it could happen.
But I mean, I'm not quite sure Trump is ready to get the U.S. dragged into a major war, even though he talks that way.
But
Because
does he
he's used to
understand the
bullying
consequences?
people. Pardon?
But does he? But he might not understand the consequences of saying yes, do it.
Yeah, because it worked for him in Syria.
Right, and Israel
And what-
with
what-
moving the embassy.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody thought that there's going to be a major, riots, but nothing happened. So, these are
But Trump
troubling.
is susceptible to a flattery campaign. And if Kim Jong-un has the wits to mount a campaign to stroke Donald Trump, Trump will come right in line.
Mm-hmm.
So it could go that way too.
yes.
And this is why the Olympics are so crucial,
Mm-hmm.
because you're going to have the two ladies there.
Mm-hmm.
My big question is probably just my personal, but why don't we see that big political opposition to the bloody nose strategy from the Republican side? I mean, Democrats, the senators, they wrote a letter to the president opposing this idea, but
Only 18 people signed. I mean, that's like nothing. Why aren't more people opposed to it? I don't know, because why aren't more people opposed to lots of things? But it's just
Well, they're more focused on other things in the
Polit-
Congress
on
right
the
now.
domestic
like shutting
things.
down the government and the Mueller probe. I mean, we're going to see a crisis in the next 2 months of whether or not Trump testifies and how he testifies before the special prosecutor. Now, the danger there is they might be tempted to cause some foreign adventurism to distract from this. But this is heading, I'm old, well, so's John. We're old enough to remember Richard Nixon going down this road.
Yeah.
And the movie didn't end well for Nixon, right? So, I mean, Congress is all focused on that. And now Trump, came out and said, "You're traitors if you don't applaud for me."
No, wait a minute.
And all this.
I watched the video of that, and he was joking. It was
Well,
it was
but you can't really joke
I
like
know,
that
but
as
it was
president.
It was inappropriate. But if you watch the video, it's very clear that he was joking.
And he's going to have this big military parade, which is like Mussolini or Brezhnev. And there's all these other domestic distractions, plus the stock market, depending on how the correction takes place. So I think Korea's not going to be that much of a focus on the Congress unless Kim Jong-un does some major test or draws it back in. It's just not there. Right now, they're like, are we going to keep the government open? Even if they pass it, it's till March. What are we going to do about immigration? What's going to happen with the special prosecutor? How's the economy going? And the midterms are coming up. That's what Congress is thinking about. North Korea is the last thing on most members' minds right now, really.
I think Kim Jong-un is going to continue to miscalculate. I think generally there's Democratic and Republican general mood that while we don't want a bloody nose, I think there's a general consensus that there has to be a credible threat of bloody nose to get North Korea to move.
Right, that's true.
You get that kind of, I think, support both in the Democrats' circles. And so, while, getting your 2 minutes on CNN because you oppose the bloody nose would get you that. But I think among the senior staffers, there's generally, we don't want to go there, but that's kind of absolutely necessary now.
Well, I hope he understands the consequences possibly of doing that. Now, maybe he can do it, and maybe he can get away with it if there's a specific provocation. I'm using provocation in its real sense, not anything that we don't like that North Korea does is a big provocation. If they do a nuclear test or a missile test, that could probably initiate a bloody nose. But
coupled with renewed North Korea Chinese feel good. If U.S.-China relations get really bad, as Dennis says about trade, and North Korea feels like it's going to get better backing from China, then it might feel more emboldened to take more steps on its testing.
I don't follow that. Maybe, I don't know. I think the relationship with Beijing is in a trash can. It's terrible.
It's bad, but that doesn't, husband and wives, bad relationships stay on for decades.
As soon as North Korea says, let's talk or let's have some economic exchange or whatever, Beijing will come running, I would think.
Particularly if nothing's going on positive
right.
with us or with Japan. Yeah.
Before we talk about a little bit more about China, let me ask you this question. A little bit provocative, if you will, but to what extent do you think the midterm election will play a role in the direction of Trump's North Korea policy?
You mean the U.S.
Yeah.
elections?
Some Korean people think there could be some chances here. Is it just a simple conspiracy theory?
No impact.
It's not a factor.
I don't think it's
At the moment, I agree it's not a factor.
It's not a fact. That's not how people are voting. I mean, granted,
if he did the bloody nose before the midterms,
then it could
then
be
it would be a huge factor.
Correct.
Because
that's correct. Yes.
Because all sorts of bad stuff would probably
correct.
I think in the House, on the House side, you have candidates running on. I don't think Democrats would raise any of this issue, but you're going to have upstart Republicans who are veterans, and you already see that in their ads that they've served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and so they then draw in North Korea as, hey, I'm going to be strong on national defense. So you see that. So I think at least on the Republican side, you're going to see that aspect of North Korea coming into the campaign. But I think Raleigh, Charleston, Salina, Kansas. I mean, voters are not going to go thinking, what's my congressman going to say about North Korea? I don't think it's going to.
Well, what's the number of Korean Americans in the U.S. right now?
Too many.
At least too many, right, Jim?
Is it
It's like a
couple of million?
couple of
I
million
think.
legal and probably just as many illegal. Yes.
All right, let me move on to the U.S. ambassador to Korea issue. So now that the White House has abandoned the plans to nominate Victor Cha as the U.S. ambassador to Seoul, so we may have to wait another several months to see another candidate nominated. So how serious do you think this situation is?
It's not serious at all. What do we give a rat's ass? I mean, it's just, to me, I mean, as a Korean American, everyone's like, because you read the Korean papers every day and you think this is important. But really, I mean, do we have an ambassador in Estonia? I don't know. Does that affect me? I mean, I think it just doesn't really resonate, and in this administration, it won't resonate. And
Besides, the guy who's there as Chargé is a pretty good guy, Napper, and maybe the same thing will happen as happened with our Assistant Secretary for East Asia.
I think it matters. I think it's a huge deal, especially with North Korea and the way this administration is going on North Korea.
Who are they going to get?
And the possible
Who
and
can
the
they get?
possible divergence between South Korea and the U.S. on these on these and other issues. You need a person there to keep the information flowing and the communications going. So I
Who?
think it's a big problem.
Who?
I don't know, but I think it's a big
I don't
problem.
think there is anybody.
I disagree with you on this not being a big issue. I think it's a huge issue.
As soon as you nominate someone,
I think
this whole
administration
question
is not
of
a
the
big issue.
bloody nose approach is going to come up at the confirmation.
Correct.
And it's going to be a huge debate. And the best bet is just to move Napper over into a permanent position, just like they did with Sue Thorne, who's perfectly fine as Assistant Secretary.
Well, I think ambassadors, especially having worked at embassies, right, make a difference when you have an ambassador like Mark Lippert, who had worked as a staffer for Obama and could actually call him, or Caroline Kennedy, because of her family connection and the fact her and her father, or her uncle, came in and saved Obama after the Reverend Wright fiasco and turned on the Clintons. So when you have an ambassador like a Caroline Kennedy or a Mark Lippert, it makes a huge difference because they can go right through the bureaucracy and
that's
get
true.
to the key people in
Yes,
Washington.
That's absolutely true.
Right. Is there somebody like that?
But
I don't know.
Who can Trump tap who's like that? There isn't anybody, I don't think.
Someone who wants it, who has that kind of.
I mean, what happened with Victor Cha? Josh Rogan said all that stuff that it wasn't really the policy disagreements, right? So much, as other people were saying.
I
Right?
agree with that. I tend to agree with that. I think it's just, who knows how White House makes decisions. Any White House makes decisions, but
All the
Especially
steps
this
were
one.
taken for him to get on board.
so.
You don't just discover things at the last minute. Agremont was given.
That's true. They did
Yeah.
give Agremont, right?
You don't submit it to the South Korean government with these red flags still around.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really what you don't ask for Agremont and then say, "Oh, we're not sending." Now that you've agreed, we're not sending this person. That's really a Keystone Cop type approach to foreign policy. You don't ask a foreign government agree to this person and then it's like you're pulling a fast one on them. Like, why'd they even bother to ask them to
So I don't know
agree?
what exactly was the trigger, but there are lots of things that don't make sense to me.
Is it? I mean, some people say they never got over Jared and his list that Michael Green, who was sort of Victor's, big brother or something at CSIS, had signed the Never Trump. Is that? And so even though Victor hadn't, but if that was an issue for them, they should have
They
never
would-
gone that far with
would have
Victor,
been-
right? If is it guilt by association? So is it anybody who's friends with somebody who signed the Never
Why
Trump?
did it take a year?
Yeah, that's what that because they're so incompetent is the answer, right?
I'm sure it's a mix of issues that contributed to where.
Because I mean, if Victor was like out because he's friends with Michael Green or an associate, that should have been right at the beginning, right? It's weird. It shows what this book shows, that they're just total chaos in the White House as far as decision making, right?
Who do you think they are listening to now?
On Korea,
In Korea?
Yes.
I think it's the president's instincts.
No.
Yeah,
Master and Pottinger.
I hope not.
Mattis.
Well,
Mattis,
isn't
I don't have-
McMaster is like bomb North Korea, isn't he?
McMaster is
Yeah.
Mattis. Mattis is Mr. Cool.
Yeah, Maddox is different, but McMaster's made all these very provocative statements, right? So, I mean, I hope he's not listening to him. But then there's the rumors McMaster's going to be out, but then Tillerson was going to be out, Sessions was going to be out. In Trump world, you go almost out the door, and sometimes you do go out the door, but like Bannon almost went out the door, came back, and then he did really go out the door. He crossed Jared and Ivanka, but, so is McMaster leaving, really, or not leaving? Dina Powell left, right? So I don't know. You don't know what's going on with these
The
people.
deputy NSA.
Yeah. She was, and Ivanka brought her
She's the
in.
one that went to Singapore.
That's KT McFarland.
She was considered an adult in the kindergarten,
Dina.
to put it. Yeah, Dina Powell, yeah, was one of the kindergarten teachers, right, who was trying to keep the kids from fighting in the sandbox at the White House, right? She gave up after a year, right?
Do you think Tillerson is still in a shaky position, or he still has a chance to extend his term?
Well, he's made it past a year. I mean, people said he was going to go as soon as the year was over, and now he's still there. I mean, Sessions, it seems to be sometimes Trump uses this thing where he bullies and you're supposed to leave, like Sessions was supposed to, and then Sessions just didn't resign, and then they realized, oh my God, if we get rid of Sessions, trying to get a confirmation for another attorney general would be such a mess. That sometimes if you hang out through the wrath of, because supposedly Tillerson said not only Trump was a, what did he say, moron, but he said an effing moron, I heard from people at the State Department at that meeting last July.
You don't have to report that.
But Trump, heard about that, so he bullied Tillerson, he humiliated him. They undercut him, like when he spoke over there at the Atlantic Council, is that in December, and said, we're going to talk to North Korea. And the next day they came out and said, they've kneecapped him several times, but he hasn't left. So maybe he'll just hang on, I think. It looks like he's hanging around for a while anyway, because that whole plan to move Pompeo and everybody musical chairs, it seems.
But I heard Pompeo really likes his job over at CIA. That he really likes that.
But I'm sure CIA people don't like him.
I don't know. I haven't. What do you hear? From the old store.
Yeah, on the record.
But I've also heard that it's inevitable that he will go over to state. And,
I think it depends on whether Tillerson can achieve a foreign policy success. And North Korea might be one of the areas in which he could accomplish something.
Yeah, because Jared's taking credit for Jerusalem, isn't he? Isn't that supposedly Jared and MSB? Is that the Saudi crown prince? And Netanyahu? Tillerson didn't get any credit for any of the Middle East stuff, right? So
I heard Tillerson. I heard expectations are that Tillerson will stay.
yeah, that's what I would
And I
think.
kind of saw Vancouver, that was his initiative, as a sign that, you don't start a new initiative and then just leave, when you know that you're leaving a week later or a month later. So I don't know, I think he'll probably stay.
And he finally got Thornton right in
Yeah,
as his.
exactly.
He finally got her.
That's
That
right.
took like
That's
a
right.
whole year.
That's right.
And nobody wanted her, and he finally got her appointed, and that's his person, right? So, I think he's doing a Sessions. He's taking the abuse from the president and the public humiliation and not resigning. And that seems to work with Trump. If you take all his shit, you just can stay, right?
Before we wrap up, I promise you.
Wrap up, we haven't discussed
It's
it.
already almost 1 p.m. So I don't want you to put you up. So
No, I don't have anything
let me ask this last question. Did you want to do something in your mind? You talked about Olympics, right? Well, one of the keywords you can.
Well, we've already talked about that. Whether there be a meeting between the sister and maybe.
Are you taking notes?
Some
Yes.
other
Oh.
dialogue between.
Don't write some of my vulgar words.
and North Korea. And if there's going to be a fuzzy war feeling from the Olympics that spills over in the South Korean public mood for several months. And for that matter, even Abe, who knows what he's going to do. So I think people are looking at North Korean behavior too tactically. This could be, in fact, a strategic decision on their part. They've always had the Byungjin policy, the two-track policy, and the focus up to now has been on the strategic side, the nuclear program, the missile program, but the other side is economic revival. And if he decides that now is the time to move over hard to that second track, then you could see renewed discussion of major inter-Korean infrastructure projects. And we've already talked about the South Korean government wanting to have something to point to as an accomplishment. So I imagine Kaesong and Kumgang Mountain and maybe some other things, development in the Haeju area, could be back on it. Railroads, pipelines, all that stuff.
But how do
could be
they do
back
that
on
with
the thing.
UN sanctions, the new
They're
UN sanctions?
going to ignore the sanctions.
But how can they? I
They
mean,
can't just get rid of sanctions by themselves.
They just ignore it.
but
Even-
they're not China or Russia. They're supposed to be a responsible stakeholder
Well,
to
that
borrow
and,
from.
and they have to risk aligning with China versus U.S. and Tokyo, who are going to be stronger on North Korea than South Korea. Sounds awfully awkward.
I mean, I would think immediately Breitbart News and everybody, if they open Kaesong, there would be a huge explosion in the right-wing U.S. media, and people would be. And Nikki Haley, look at her mouth in the UN. She's pretty. She kind of repeats the Trump hardline stuff.
She's foaming at the mouth.
Yeah, but I mean, won't she be in the UN saying our South Korean ally is violating the sanctions? I could see her saying that.
But do you agree Kim Jong-un has made a strategic decision at the beginning of this year?
Tactical
I don't
decision.
I don't think so. Why do you think tactical?
Tactical decision to reach out to South Korea.
Yeah, why
Yeah.
are you circumscribing it with the word tactical?
You think it's strategic?
I don't know. It depends on where it goes.
But you indicated it was a strategic.
I think it was.
Strategic how?
Because he's had for a long time this two-track policy. And our focus has been on the one track, the missile and the nuclear. We've been fixated on that. I think he wants to show something on the other track and maybe
Sure.
get the South
I agree with
Korean
that.
and possibly even eventually a U.S. buy-in.
Yeah.
And a Japanese buy-in.
The strategic means to me that he's going to downplay the nuclear stuff and somehow it's just going to be put on the shelf while he's focusing on the economy. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it. There are going to be missile developments, there are going to be nuclear developments, there are going to be other advancements like the SLBM they have to finish. That they're keen on finishing and completing. So I don't think
Absolutely.
it's like you stop one and then you go on the other track. I think it's both. He's been consistent on doing both, but I think the outreach makes me think that he realizes vulnerabilities on that economic track, and that's why he wants South Korea to give them fuel for their little, for their tanker, pay for the, the cheerleaders, all that kind of stuff.
Well, even when I went up to Congress a week ago, as you know, with that one staffer, brought up Kim Dae-jung bought the Nobel Peace Prize and brought up certain suspicions in Congress. What has South Korea given already under the table to North Korea to participate in the Olympics? And that'll be a big story if that ever comes out, if it turns out the South Koreans sent
And
$500 million to
I don't think the
Pyongyang
South
or
Korean
something.
public is there, like especially among the young people. It's just they think of North Koreans as free riders. They just
Well,
come
see,
in with their hands
know,
out.
don't-
They're not
don't-
thinking about unification.
Don't record this, since you used the word free rider. I mean,
Kelly and the Dreamers,
don't,
right?
Don't record this.
You're Kelly and the Dreamers.
What the hell?
Free
That's
ride.
that's a good name for a band.
What the hell?
You know, Kelly lays you on the
Yes,
couch.
yes.
That's what you sound like, the South Korean kids talking about North Korea, right?
What the hell is the matter with South Korea? That they don't take on board realistically the threat from North Korea. Oh, we don't want to invite them to the Olympics. We're going to have protests.
Oh, you mean those South Koreans would
Yeah.
protest? Why shouldn't they protest? It's a free society. They should protest.
Should be all thrown in
And
jail.
I think it would be wrong if if President Moon says, hey, you know what, North Korea, you're right. Let me quell those protests because hey, I'm the candlelight president, right? So screw that. That's crazy talk.
Well,
Anyway,
I just don't like right-wing people in South Korea
they killed
egging on the
50
United
people
States.
8 years ago.
What?
They have 3 Americans
You're talking
hostage.
about
Yeah,
Cheonan?
yeah.
Well, that was payback.
So they
It's getting
deserve
hotter.
it.
I'm not saying that, but it's clear action reaction. You're a PhD
I
in
remember
political science.
action. I remember no history. I remember
okay.
action, reaction, but I can't soften up this regime. The regime, of course, is different from the people. And if Moon wants to maintain his integrity, I think he has to stand up for people's right to protest.
And I also think the young South Koreans that you're talking about are not the old right-wing people from World War II. They're the millennials. They're like, I've talked to my Korean daughter-in-law, my son's wife. She's not knee-jerk against North Korea because of some ideological Park Chung-hee, what you were talking. It has to do with, hey, South Korea, we're doing okay. These people are like so alienated from us and all they want is money. And it's more of I want to keep my iPhones and my lifestyle. And North Korea could cramp my lifestyle. It has nothing to do with anti-communist ideology like the older generation, right?
Right.
But the fact is that they live in a terrible neighborhood, and they're going to have to reach some accommodation with those people. And they're going to have to take the lead in formulating a policy. And they can't always be looking over their shoulder at Washington and what does Big Brother want me to do?
Well, I don't think young South
be
Koreans
in
think that either.
I would be in agreement
They
with
don't
that.
care what Washington thinks either. They just want to keep the good times rolling. And
I think this
It'll all go away
government
very quickly.
would choose to do that. Would choose to do that if they think they can get away with it.
Good.
But they do live in a democratic society that has elections every so many years. And that's what's going to prevent this government from doing some of the more extreme things that they want to do. But, there are things that in the next 2-3 years, I think they're going to change their foreign policy team after this election. I think the foreign policy U.S. guys like Chung Eui-young, they're going to be out. They're going to be replaced by we're on a very finite timetable to improve this with North Korea, or we're going to be in a war mentality. I think you're going to have, depending on where Moon Jae-in sits on the poll, I think he's going to make an official call for an Afghan transfer. I think those in the inner circle sees that as a way to stop a war on the Korean Peninsula. I mean,
But do people realize that there is not a war on the Korean Peninsula because the U.S. troops are there and because there's been robust deterrence efforts?
And
I think this is. I think the
That's
fact
not-
that you have peace, you're taking this peace as a sign that.
That's not how the 6 to 8 people around the Blue House think. Just as the 6 to 8 people in the White House that's going to make that decision on the bloody nose don't think the way we think. They'll be under a crisis mentality, life and death, and they will make policies based on that kind of.
But do they also realize Opcon transfer, given what we were talking about, Trump does not value alliances? That gives him an exit strategy from the Korean Peninsula. I mean, you do Opcon transfer, and Trump could say, "Hey, you're not paying enough for the troops."
security is your problem,
Right.
and if the Moon administration is ready for that, then
So in December,
Right.
after
It's a
that talk
great
at the
time
National
for Trump
Assembly,
to say, well,
concluded
bye-bye,
that-
good luck. Opcon transfer, right?
Yeah.
What I said was a return to post-1945 view, and none of these guys picked it up. Which meant at the end of the alliance, we have Japan as our only ally in the Northeast Asia.
Well, we have
a-
Taiwan, but we can't admit it.
and we
But
have,
they
missile
need us,
defense
right?
Like there is no tomorrow. And all future violations of ABM or remnants of the ABM treaty will all be taken care of because of our. I think you will see missile defense on steroids like you've not since the early days of Ronald Reagan.
All right, I think it's time to wrap up. The one big challenge left to me is how to fit this conversation into one edition. Probably I need to divide it into two, but that's a happy challenge to me. And thank you very much for your time today. And
So are you going to put this in the report, this conversation?
Yes,
Oh, I see.
oh, you didn't
Don't
read
use all my bad
email.
words.
Okay.
Like
Tillerson
Tillerson saying,
Names.
effing moron.
Can we
Don't
see
put
the- can we see the transcript before?
Sure.
Tillerson?
Don't put names. Just say participants. Here are the participants.
Participants
And
one-
here are the
People in Seoul will
discussions.
think I have a potty
This is a
mouth,
discussion.
right?
Don't attribute it to names because there are a lot of things that we really said that should have been said off the record.
That we can remove just so that.
No,
So
that's
just do it.
Yeah, just say,
Which is-
participants discuss these issues rather
You
than
don't have to
attributing
have
names.
All right.
But
Everybody
but list the
agree?
participants.
That's fine. That's
I
fine.
think that's better.
Yeah.
It's infinitely better.
Okay, so
Well.
it's gonna be participant 1, 2, 3.
No,
No, don't put the names.
I
of
want to be. I want to be
You
Kelly.
put
You
the-
can be a dreamer.
You can put the names in an introductory paragraph, but.
Oh, you're Kelly?
But
I'm
the
Kelly. You
discussion.
can be the dreamer.
And you
I,
can say you have-
I'll
You
write
can
this
all be the
down.
dreamers. Dreamer number 1,
Participants
dreamer number
agreed.
2, dreamer number 3.
One participant.
I'm mad at Kelly anyway
strongly-
because
you don't have to
his
mention
own
names.
people, as Lawrence O'Donnell was
Not
saying last night, when they
transcript
came off the
itself,
boat from
summary
Ireland
of
all
the
beaten up and stuff.
discrimination.
If you saw
Discrimination
Victoria,
of the
did you see the
local-
episode about the famine and
And you'll
the
realize
no,
Victorians and
I used to
About
lead
70% of
tours
it's
of the
just
Lower East
fluff.
Side where all the Irish were, right?
Right.
And I used to say, the Irish couldn't vote. They couldn't hold certain jobs. They were hugely discriminated against. Catholics, forget it, right? And then I'll say these to to the 5th graders, and they're like, I'm Catholic, or I'm or my grandfather was Irish, and they just don't understand. Like
that they're only 2
200
steps.
years ago, exactly.
Some of them, it's really just World War One. They're not that. I mean, Trump's father, Fred Trump, was at an KKK rally. He was arrested in the late 20s.
Right.
It wasn't directed against the blacks or the Jews like most KKK rallies. It was against the Irish Catholics. It was about Al Smith running for president, the first Irish Catholic.
Right.
And Trump's
That's right.
father
That's
was
right. That's
arrested
right.
there.
That's right.
So
That's
there
right.
you go. That's only 1928, right? We're not that long separated. That's why for Kelly to say, oh, these dirty, lazy dreamers get off the couch. I'm like, that's what they were saying about your people, Kelly. What's wrong with you?
Well, the other thing is to register in that program, you have to pay a fee of $500 per head. So some of these people may not have $500. So it's fair change at the end.
Also, before Obama gave the permission to work, getting off the couch and working was illegal for illegal immigrants. So if they don't follow any semblance of the law, they can't work.
And if you were a baby and your parents brought you to America, I mean, what did you have to do with it, right?
Blame your parents, I suppose.
I guess you blame the parents, right? I don't know.
When are the South Koreans protesting?
Well,
Well, we've called protesters in South Korea before when Trump was there. So we had both pro-America and anti-America protests. The anti-America protests we lined with trucks and like buses. We hid it away from view and highlighted the pro-America rallies, so Trump could see that on his way in and out of the main.
so are you
main
from
road.
New York?
Of course I am.
Ah,
Only
Right,
a
thank
New
you.
Yorker would have a
Thank you.
pocketbook full of iPhones.
All right. All right, good meeting.
Nice seeing
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me send out the summary of this discussion, not the transcript. Right? You don't need it, right? Or if you want, we can.
No, just send us.
That's what we're going to publish, the summary of the discussion.
oh, okay. Well, this is
The transcript.
Good luck.
will be too
Okay.
long.